on the realist perspective, what is our foreign policy? What are we trying to do? Because I mean, and to the point, getting back to the conflict which is ongoing in Ukraine. I don't like conflict. I don't like when people die in Ukraine. I don't like when Ukraine's destroyed. This is not in anybody's interest. This is not good for Ukraine, obviously. This is not good for America. This is not good for Russia. But what led us to this point? You know, I failed to see why, because there was no imminent threat of a Russian invasion in Ukraine. The problem was that Zelensky was unwilling, or Poroshenko too, unwilling to give up Donbass, unwilling to give up Crimea, unwilling to give up their aspirations to NATO. And the reason that Ukraine was so emboldened is because NATO said, we got your back. Ukraine would never dare to stand up to Russia and poke them like they do, but they think that they've got NATO. They get to go to Congress and demand a no-fly zone. And it's like, so what is in realist terms, in terms of how states actually behave, not normatively, not how they ought to behave, but in terms of how we know states act and in terms of how we can expect states to act, expanding NATO to Ukraine or even talking about that is a provocative action.
So, well, first of all, it's funny that he's like, well, they wouldn't give up Donbass to Russia. It's like, really? Okay. You're saying Ukraine started this by not ceding land to a country that's invading them? Like, that's a really weird
power. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a really weird way of framing it. It's like, oh, that's basically the, you know, it's okay that I raped you. Did you see what you were wearing argument? Like, that's literally the argument that he just said.
Yeah.
I mean, did you see Ukraine with its sexy Crimea and its sexy Donbass region? It was just flaunting it in front of Russia. You know, of course they're going to, you know, try to get in there, right? But then
Russia's coming back for seconds. How dare they say no?
Right. But then the second part of this is, why is it framed by everyone? Why is it the West and Europe and America that has to continually only see this from the Russian perspective? Why does Russia not have to see this from the West or America's perspective?
Or Ukrainians' perspective.
Or Ukraine's perspective. Right. Why is it such a one-sided view that we all like? And this is what we were talking about with Sargon, where I feel like it's basically, I mean, Sargon admitted to this, though I don't think Nick would admit to this, that basically we're saying, you know, we have the bigotry of super low expectations for Russia. And we just have to accept that that Putin is just going to do crazy shit.
Right.
Or we kill him. I mean, that was basically what Sargon was saying. We have to, you know, just kill him, crush the country, or let them do whatever they want, and that there's no middle ground, which I hope is not. I hope there's a middle ground solution somewhere.
Of course.
But obviously, and Mishmeyer over here, who's complaining that, you know, we didn't look at the signs, we didn't see what, you know, Russia was going to do, we didn't predict what Russia was going to do, which is true. I assume. I mean, people weren't really predicting that this was going to happen, especially because there's nothing specific that set any of this off. But why is the same not true for Russia? Russia did not, obviously, Russia did not think that the entire world was going to fucking shit on them for this. They wouldn't. I don't think they would have done it if they thought this was going to happen the way it's happening now.
I mean, we warned them.
We did warn them.
Did he think Biden? I mean, Biden must have been asleep when he warned him. He was like, fuck it. This old geezer, he's not going to do it.
Sleepy Joe isn't going to do anything. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure that we warned them for Crimea. I'm sure we warned them for Georgia. You know, so I mean, I don't know if
Boy Who Cried
I'm assuming
Wolf.
it wasn't right. So I'm assuming he thought that it would be exactly the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the same thing. When this was interesting too, Putin completely failed to see this from the West perspective, that Europe was very happy not having to spend all its money on a fucking military.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
They were very happy with that. They didn't want to have to spend all their money on military again. They don't want to have to be worried about another war breaking out at Europe.
All right, go ahead.
So I'm saying, so Putin completely failed to see this from Europe and the West perspective. But,
yeah, unfortunately. So I figured out why Zelensky is worth so much money.
Oh, okay.
I figured it out.
Why?
So Putin did try to buy off Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
And Zelensky took the money and he said, fuck you.
Oh, wait, I just signed that, or did that actually happen?
No, this is my own speculation, but
Okay.
I think that would be pretty fucking cool, wouldn't it? I mean, if he takes his money, if he's like, okay, the money's in the account, and then he's like, oh, by the way, fuck you, buddy, get out of my country. Take a hike, bitch.
Well, if that's the case, I would say that was really fucking stupid for Zelensky.
You think they'll be able to trace the money? I mean, it's kind of base though.
I guess it's kind of base, but it's also really fucking stupid.
What's stupid about it?
You don't take the mafia don's money and he's like, okay, you're gonna do that thing I asked you to do, and then instead you fax him a picture of your ass sitting on the copy machine. Okay,
this is based as fuck. What are you talking about?
And that's super based until the mafia comes to your house to break your fucking legs and then make you sleep with the fishes at him. Okay?
They've come to the house. Like, he knew they were going to come to the house anyway.
Yeah, but see, to me, that would actually, I would say Zelensky's a scumbag if that's the case, because I would say,
really?
Yes, because I would say this is a super hyper speculation.
I
don't think this happened. But if that did happen, I would say he 100% should have expected like a strong retaliation from Russia in response to that, and that he needlessly put the country at risk just because he wanted to take Russia's money.
What if
that situation actually happened?
So what if he took the money, and he used it to feed starving children?
Doesn't matter. You don't take the mafia don's money. That's how they get
starving children.
That's how they get you. You don't take the money.
He took the money and he's using it to fight corruption in Ukraine.
No.
Okay.
Bad idea.
It's just speculation, but I thought it would be good. I'm glad I didn't have to make the decision.
But we have done that ever since 2008. And that is what has led to the current crisis. And you could argue in a hypothetical timeline, does Russia invade Ukraine without the NATO aspirations? We can't know that.
Yes, we can. They do. Fucking.
But we also can't, arrive at the situation without analyzing our own behavior and saying, how have our actions provoked Russia? Because, at the end of the day, we have to talk in terms of the tangible and the real. This is the real outcome, and it's really bad. And this is a failure, ultimately, of American policy. And you could point the blame at Russia and, fold your arms and say, well, Russia's just evil, and, they're just doing evil things, and you have to blame Russia because they're evil, and so on. And, we have no culpability. But, of course, in great power politics, yes, we have culpability. We're a global and a regional hegemon. So we do have to have some introspection and analyze how did our collective policy, how did our policy of collective security, Russian containment, did that play a role in provoking Russia to engage in a conflict where nobody wins? We have to look at it like that. And I think you'll find that these policies we're undertaking, it's naive to say that they're just so goody two shoes in nature. Oh, Ukraine joining NATO, it's totally innocuous. It's totally above board. Don't criticize it like, a country wants sovereignty and security. Who can blame them for that? It's like, well, look at the other side. It's a negotiation. Everybody's security interest is being paid attention to except for Russia. But Russia has guns too. And in a realist world order, you have to pay attention to these things. Otherwise, you get a crisis. And then I want to say one thing. And then here's the other thing. Let's entertain a scenario where Ukraine joins NATO, because they're still pushing for it, even after the crisis in 2014. Let's say today, what's that?
Of course, yeah.
Yes. Let's say Ukraine becomes a NATO member state. Okay, what do you do? Well, guess what? Crimea is still formally occupied by Russia. Donbass and the civil war between Kiev and Donbass is still ongoing. So what happens then when the government in Kiev is at war with Russian-backed proxies in Donbass? As a consequence of Ukraine joining NATO, you now have a proxy war in Ukraine, a proxy civil war between Russian-backed separatists and a NATO member state. What's more, Kiev does not acknowledge the Russian annexation.
This is why NATO doesn't let nations with contested borders enter NATO. That's one of the criterias. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Destiny brings that up.
Yeah. Of Crimea. I mean, they do not accept this fact. So, now we're in a really bad security spot where, and you could say, oh, well, this would never happen because people would never do this. But I mean, Of course, these things can happen. What happens if there's a war between Russia and Ukraine over Crimea? What happens when there's there's this ongoing proxy war between Russian-backed separatists in Donbass and Ukraine?
I mean, he says, what happens if there's a war between Russia and Ukraine over Crimea? That literally is fucking happening.
Right.
What the fuck is he talking about? What happens? It is happening.
And I've heard the argument, people say, Zelensky says, well, NATO's defensive, so Article 5 obligations aren't invoked if we attack Russia or something. But as we know, the fog of war is thick. And as to who started which conflict, of course, it would benefit the Ukrainians to say, oh, well, Russia attacked us. Now we need to fold NATO response in Crimea. The point is, you don't need to be pro-Russian or pro-American. You don't need to be an expert to say that's a really fucked up situation. It is a bad situation to have a NATO member state with disputed territory in Crimea and a proxy civil war in Donbass. Like that is probably the biggest threat to World War III in the entire world. That's probably so that American policymakers would seriously consider this in spite of what's going on. The moment that Russia invaded Crimea, the United States should have said, you know what, it's too complicated. We can't get involved. But even in 2021, they're saying we're going to enhance our strategic partnership. Ukraine will become a part of NATO. It's like, we know that Russia's not giving up Crimea. We know that the thing in Donbass isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. So even if we achieved our aspirations, all this would do is create a situation, a powder keg, that could absolutely lead to World War III, maybe the number one cause of World War III if that were to happen.
Sure. So just to shoot down the last point very quickly, nations with contested territory can't join NATO. It would never be the case that we would admit Ukraine to join while there is contested territory, unless Ukraine was willing to cede that immediately to Russia. So that's completely off the table right there. In terms of Ukraine...
KO!
Oh man, there's so many arguments to go through. One of the very first thing you talk about how like NATO expanded first. NATO was the aggressor first. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. When I was searching through, in post Cold War era conflict, right? What's happening in Europe? One of the first conflicts that happened was Russia supporting the breakaway state in Moldova during the Transnistria War. So Russia had already established a pattern of you find separatists, you fund them, you export a fuck ton of Russian passports, you get these people set up and established and they're on breakaway state, you send Russian peacekeeper troops there, and that's literally right on the Ukrainian border. So we've already got a map for what would happen in the future in South Ossetia, in Georgia, and then in what's happening now in Donbass and Ukraine. The idea that NATO is forcing Russia's hands here, when I think Russia has already had the blueprint for this exact type of action, I don't agree with that. I think that Russia has already established that pattern of behavior. In terms of, I feel like everything else is repeating over and over again. I don't even like using the realist analysis. I think it's garbage. I don't think anybody even agrees with using realism to analyze foreign policies anymore. I know that you... So,
my understanding on my cursory glance at this is that this is actually completely backwards, and that the majority of international policy academic people subscribe to some form of realism.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Destiny is completely wrong here, but
well, good.
Like to talk about, I think I called him Mearsheimer's analysis of like the state of security in 1990 and onwards from Europe. He's written a lot of essays about it. He wrote a huge one, like a 50-page paper in 1990 predicting the future state of security in Europe. It was garbage. It was horrible. His predictions that Europe would descend into constant anarchy, that countries like Japan and the United States would be looking to vie for interest here, that every country would be rearming because that's what realist countries do. It just totally and completely missed the mark. I don't think anybody takes those predictions seriously in terms of this is how countries will act. So I don't know if it's appropriate to go forward into the future when he's already failed to make successful predictions of what has really been a relatively peaceful period for 30 years in Europe, and then try to say that this frame of analysis is what we're going to use going forward when it comes to dealing with Ukraine and Russia. And then again, what's more, to reiterate for the 50 millionth time, all of these realist arguments, if we are to accept them, justifies NATO including Ukraine and being aggressive towards Russia just as much as it does Russia taking over Ukraine and I guess establishing security around its own borders. But again, I mean, I can ask you again, and I know that we'll kind of dance around again, like NATO has not shown itself to be aggressive towards Russia. The most and best you can possibly say is that there are surface-to-surface missile bases in some of these NATO countries, but I mean, what? Like, like, honestly, do you really believe that NATO countries are going to start launching missiles into Moscow? Like, do you really believe that, or is this something you're worried 20 or 30 years from now? Or do you think that the investment into ABM technology is going to become so good that, at some point we did it, guys, we beat second strike capability, time to just nuke the hell out of Russia? That sounds fantastical to me. Now, maybe we can imagine a world where that happens, but I can't use that imaginary world to justify the invasion, destruction of civilian cities, and the takeover of a sovereign nation that exists today in the real world. That would be insane to me. That sort of justification can be used for Russia to invade literally any neighbor that they could perceive in 30 years to be a threat because of technology that doesn't exist yet. I just think that's absolutely insane.